Welcome to the 100th episode of the Hail Mary podcast. I'm A Toves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We have a special guest joining us again today, our friend, Big Brown. Welcome.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm glad to be back for the 100th episode. And I just want to take a moment to say thank you, one, for having me on the episode, but also just congratulations making it to the 100th episode. I've obviously listened all the way through, and it's just been great to see the progression of your podcast. And I'm excited to see where it's going to go from here.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Well, for our 100th episode, we thought it would be fun to not only recap the 2024 season, but also reflect on the first 5 years of Traylor. So let's get started by talking about the 2024 season, and then we can kind of get into the Traylor era after that.
All right. So let me set the stage for us here on the 2024 season as we kind of go back and review it. UTSA ends up 7-6 after winning the Myrtle Beach Bowl, which we talked about a few weeks ago. They ended up the regular season 6-0 in the Dome, but were 0-6 on the road. They were also the second most penalized team in the nation with 113, and it's the most penalties in UTSA football history. Let's move on a little bit more to UTSA. On offense, they scored about 33.2 points per game, which is up from 2023, which is a good thing. Based on total yards, UTSA has a 12th ranked offense in the nation. They end up with the 11th ranked passing offense in the nation in 2024. On defense, they're the 11th ranked rush defense in the nation. They are top 10 and third and fourth down percentage defense in the nation. And they have a 23 game streak of turnovers and sacks within the games. Statistically, this UTSA team was very good, at least from if we look at the statistics. However, I started out with saying they ended up 7-6. We're at the Myrtle Beach Bowl, not where we thought we'd be at. There were different expectations. So let's start out, and I'm going to ask you both this question. In your opinion, was this season a success?
So I kind of broke it down into two parts. The first part, obviously, being just the record itself. When you look at it like that, when you say, okay, we're coming off of our second season in the American, it's not a success. Last year, we were one game away from making it to the championship game. We were at that game together. So it's not a success in that respect. But when I look back at the season, it's a success, at least to me, in that Traylor didn't lose the team, didn't lose the locker room. There was a point where we could have easily just fallen apart. The wheels could have come off, and we didn't see that. We didn't see that. I know you guys have much more information as far as transfer portal and stuff like that, but we saw, for the most part, the team stay pretty much intact. And from what I saw, there wasn't a lot of negative talk out there about, players unhappy with the course of the team or where it was going. So I think, especially given that record, you have to kind of look back and say, okay, we have somewhat of a success in that respect. But I'll definitely want to hear your guys' opinions on how the season went.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, you can say there were successes within the season, but overall, my opinion would be that it wasn't a success. If you look at it, like you mentioned, just based on the number of wins, you'd say, okay, winning record, great. But when you look at some of those losses and how we got to those losses, I think that's where, it's hard to say overall that the season was a success when you show up to Texas State and you just kind of get your butt whooped because you weren't prepared. You have this colossal collapse in the second half of the Tulsa game, the undisciplined played in the Rice game. It's just those things that I think are disappointments because we weren't expecting to see the team play that way. But, like you mentioned, it doesn't take away from the overall or from pieces of success within the season. And to your point, I think the greatest one is just going back to Traylor's culture. He obviously established a really strong culture. And, we talked about it on the podcast. There are times when it's easy to look at your culture when you're winning, but it's really important to look at the culture when you're losing, because that tells you whether or not what you built was sustainable. And like you mentioned, hearing the players rally around each other. There was Cyrus Simon, who was not a single digit, who got the team together and had a player meeting, to try to make sure that everyone was still in it for the right reasons. And I think those are the things that were successes within the season. But, overall, I'd probably give, if I had to give a grade, I'd give it a C.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to say that it wasn't a success, and I think because we opened up in the AAC, media days with Traylor openly talking about the potential of being in the championship game, that playoff spot. Now, if you go back and listen to that interview, he does talk about it and say, "Look, we haven't accomplished anything, but this is something, this is what people feel about us, so we have to be able to acknowledge that." And I thought that was such a grown-up answer from like previous years where he was trying to deflect, and I think he knew he had good teams, but he would just deflect and say, no, that's a culture pillar violation, right? This time him and the team kind of embraced it. That was really cool. But I mean, he's already setting the bar there for us, for his team and for fans, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of mentions during the season, he'll do this plenty of times where he'll say, well, fans have different expectations, right? Like they don't understand, but you openly talk about it. So, you have to own some of that. But then second, I think most importantly, the reason I say it's not a success is because saying something isn't a success, it's going to show that there's growth in the program, because now we're no longer, we're trying to elevate our goals. Every single year, even professionally, what we do is we get goals given to us by our, people upstairs, right? And they'll say, okay, you achieved those. All right, well, this year we need you to do this now. So, it's just higher expectations. So that's the same thing with UTSA. As we continue to progress, we're going to need to have those higher expectations. And we did have them this year. So, it's not a bad thing to me saying that it wasn't a success. But I also can understand that, like, people saying, well, we did do this, we did this. Yes, yes, I agree with you guys. There were successes. But if you keep saying that everything is success, it's more like just giving a little ribbon every single season. And I think to me, 2020, 2021, 22, and even to an extent 23, I think we're more of a success than what we saw this year with this team.
Yeah.
So based on that too, I mean, we kind of talked about it in the mid-season, but love to hear also Brown's opinion on this. But now that we talked about it not really being a success, how do the fans and city respond to a record that doesn't live up to expectations? And I think Brown's going to hit it right on the nose. But here you go, Brown. Here's my softball to you.
All right, I'm going to knock it out the park. The fans don't show up. We've seen this throughout the brief history of UTSA football. One of the things that comes back to me, I was thinking about right now as we were talking about this, through both of our Conference USA championships, I remember seeing Traylor on the news essentially pleading for the city to come out to fill the dome to support
Mm-hmm.
for a championship.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to call out Texas, not in a disrespectful way. I think Texas is a fantastic program, and also just the fact that I can mention UTSA and Texas in the same sentence, and they're kind of, at least in the same room in a certain sense, is a far cry from the first days of the program. But we were competing for conference championships, and meanwhile you have Texas. A lot of the fans in the city will support Texas no matter what, whether it's a up year or down year or whatever.
Yeah.
We have the success and we're winning games, in a very comfortable fashion, and a very, we have these dramatic wins mixed in with these huge plays, players from the city, and yet we're still not able to get fans in. So now all of a sudden, when you have a season that's not what we expect, where we're not winning the games like we used to in previous years, it really kind of felt like some of the dark days, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, the city, they seem to love us, actually kind of love us when we're doing our best, and they don't even know who we are, when we start actually losing a few games. So yeah, those are my feelings on it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's interesting because Trailer had said, look, there's this like 16, 20,000 that are always going to show up. And he's right. For the most part, they're the season ticket holders plus that extra, several thousand that are going to be coming, and they're diehard UTSA fans. But it seems like unless it's an event, unless it's unprecedented, you can't get the average t-shirt fan to show up. And certainly this season with UT being as good as they were, if people had the choice between going to Austin to see a UT game or coming to UTSA, I think they chose to go to UT.
I kind of remember when the three of us went to go watch we went to, I think, a bar or somewhere to go watch the UTSA game this season. And I remember there was a guy that was there that was watching us get blown out, and he made a comment like, I thought UTSA was good. And I was like, well, I kind of laughed because I'm thinking it's the disparity, right? Like the
Right.
growth of UT and where they had to get to, whereas UTSA is like, all right, we're kind of still struggling along. We're trying to turn the corner here. Something that UT did a long time ago, or at least to an extent did a long time ago. So to your point, Rob, to be the fact that we have been in the same sentence as UT is good. I just trying to figure out how at some point we try to win over those fans to show up. And I go back and just reiterate what you guys said. San Antonio loves a winner. It just doesn't seem to recognize there's going to be some fun within some of those losing seasons or those seasons that aren't as good. So
Yeah.
you got to enjoy it all.
I have a saying, at least I'm trying to make it a saying, I guess, where San Antonio is a blue collar city that likes its teams white collar. They like the
Yeah.
teams that the teams that have a ton of money, that will always have the best facilities, best players, everything. And really UTSA, if you look at it at its core, it doesn't have the same money. It's very, very blue collar, and it's scrapping to get whatever it can. You would think that San Antonio would rally behind that, but they just don't. They like their established franchises, like the Dallas Cowboys of the world, and the UT Longhorns and A&Ms of the world. So it's a tough battle for UTSA to kind of get that fandom to show up, and not just show up, but also stay there.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So we made predictions or had kind of tried to figure out what we thought was going to happen during the season. So, Brown, obviously jump in whenever you get a chance here. But one of the things, Atos, was what did we get right? And I think the big one, so to have a little quick discussion here, is we knew Owen was the guy.
Yeah. I mean, from early on, we had said, even back in the spring, Owen is the guy who's going to be the starting quarterback. Sure, Traylor's going to pump up this, competition between him and Eddie Lee because he needs to keep Eddie Lee engaged. He doesn't want to, tip his hand to anybody. That's just kind of his thing. He always wants the competition guessing, right? But it was clear from the way that Owen played in the bowl game. It was clear from the way that he handled himself in the scrimmage we saw in the spring practice and then in the interviews in the fall that he was QB1. And we were right.
Yeah, we were. Now, one of the things that I had concerns about though was the wide receivers because I thought the wide receiver drops, and I
Yeah.
think at one point I remember Browns mentioning it to me in the middle of the season, going, "To me, or there's been some big drops here." So I went back and looked, as per my usual, look at the stats, and per PFF, we had 34 drops this season. In 2020, we had 9. 2021, we had 18. 2022, we had 20. 2023, 11. I knew that this wide receiver group was going to struggle because you're finally losing, I wouldn't say probably, the top 3 receivers in your history, and you're hoping that one of them comes back. So you then get kind of stuck with this kind of newer group, but you still had some experience there. So it's hard to like go back and look at that and say, oh, yeah, this was going to be fine. the reality is that, at least to me, is that I knew this wide receiver group was going to struggle, but I didn't think they were going to struggle this much. And that,
Yeah.
I think, and it was frustrating to me mostly, is that sure, you hear the 34 drops, that's a ton, but there was some backbreaking, easy receptions that I think we looked at some of these games or like we could have extended drives just by an easy catch.
Yeah, and the fact that Owen coming in as a new quarterback is really trying to establish himself and get into a rhythm and gain confidence, that's when you want to have sure-handed receivers around him because some of those drops, Owen really threw a great ball. And, again, I think in addition to extending the drive, it would have just probably helped him get into a groove a little bit quicker.
You know, we got it right, and unfortunately,
One of those ones that we didn't want to be right about. Yeah.
exactly.
I feel like the pinnacle of that, y'all were at the game, but just watching it on TV was the Eastern Carolina game
Hmm.
where at least watching it from home, it felt like at a certain point that Owen was just going to start throwing the ball to himself, just trying to pitch and catch because like nobody could catch anything. And what made it even more frustrating is there was at least a point where towards the end of the game where it felt like we had opportunity to possibly pull out a win there,
Yeah.
and to kind of have those drops, it was just devastating to see. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and I
yeah,
think that's
y'all.
why he kind of got into that situation right at the end where he was trying to play hero ball because he probably was super frustrated. He thought, I'm gonna throw this ball, no one's gonna catch it anyways.
The other one is we had concerns with the secondary, and to an extent, we got this correct. Now, we have to kind of caveat this because essentially it's a bottom 10 passing defense,
Hmm.
which I mean, you kind of couple that with a rush defense that's top 10, something's got to give, right? Like,
Right.
so you stack up the line to make sure you're stopping the run, so you don't get continually gashed and, allow teams to continually extend drives. But on the other hand, secondary wise or even pass defense wise, we just weren't able to make those stops.
Going into the season, you were trying to figure out who's going to replace, Cam Alexander and where's the depth going to come from on the secondary. And we did see, this kind of rise of Zay Frazier really to a point that I don't think we anticipated. So from that perspective, you kind of might look at it and say, well, it didn't turn out that bad. But, to your point, we also got into a situation where I think we sold out so much for the run game that you can't do everything all the time.
Well, I mean, you look back at Rice and at Tulsa, two games that were going to be wins, and the pass defense just gets annihilated, just at the end. And I will tell you that the Rice game was the one where it was a little more questionable because of the fact that it took a hell of a catch for them to win that game.
Hmm.
However, it's still a bad pass defense, right? Like that's just what ends up happening. And so I mean, while we talk about the secondary, I think there was a lot of really good moments and there was a lot of good things that happened there. It just unfortunately, um, they were verified, I guess, to an
Yeah.
extent. All right, what did we get wrong? And this one, this one I think is squarely on me. You again had concerns with the O line, and I was like, no way. This is the deepest O line we've had in seasons.
Yeah, you literally said that. This is the deep. You were excited about the depth of the O line.
I was, and I should have walked that back after the first couple of games when I realized that Mekhi Hart is still in the lineup. And look, I like Mekhi Hart, but he shouldn't have been counted on as a part-time starter regardless. I mean, it took him a while to get in shape, and really he was kind of splitting snaps.
Hmm.
That hurt the continuity of this offensive line, first of all, because yes, he needs those snaps, but the fact that it's taking him some snaps to get essentially in shape is a problem. So right then and there, again, there had been red flags, yet could not get, or I didn't go back and say, hey, you know what, this is a red flag and this is gonna be a problem, right? Like
Yeah.
this. And the thing is that there's some guys out there, like one of the top recruits in our history is Jonah Miller on the offensive line. did not see the field up until I think it was the last game against Coastal Carolina. He got a few snaps. I think he got like the last 4 snaps of the season. So are you redshirting him? Is he not good enough to have replaced or at least gotten in there to play some? That a lot of concerns there for me.
Yeah, and I mean, just the fact that even when we did get to a point, probably the later half of the season, where we had this consistent O line, we had Corey Godnett in there, and you hear Traylor talking about, oh, Corey's basically playing on one leg. Well, why? If we had all this depth, why is Corey out there putting
Right.
himself in a situation where he's going to get injured again and be out for the season potentially? I mean, because that's what happened with Mackay, it just seemed very baffling, especially since there were other transfers too that came in who you would assume would have had enough experience that they should have been able to make at least some snaps or a bigger impact. And we didn't really see very much of any of them.
All right. The other thing we got wrong was your concerns about the inside linebackers.
Yeah, and going into the preview when I made that comment, we thought at the time that we might be losing Martavius French. It was during that time period where he was suspended, and we didn't really know whether or not he was going to come back. Now, fortunately, he came back, and it didn't take him very long to kind of get back into the groove and into the rotation. So, that turned out much better than anticipated. The other piece of it was, we were just kind of trying to figure out who was really going to be the guy to take over the snaps that Trey Moore had. And there was kind of this back and forth discussion about, are you really going to see that from Jamori or Danye or a combination of all of them? And, fortunately this season, I guess good and bad, Jamori really had a fabulous season and he was the defensive player of the year. And unfortunately, once, we knew we were going to lose him this season, but once the JUCO ruling came out, for a variety of reasons, he's now transferring to West Virginia. So we're still going to lose him. And I guess we'll have to talk about who's going to replace him when we do our preview again. But at least that inside linebacker position really turned out to be a much better situation than I at first thought it would be.
The other thing we got wrong, and I think everybody's gonna would call us on this, is our overall record predictions.
Oh God,
Whether it
yeah.
was like this last spring or before the season. I mean, we both had like 9 or 10 wins for this team, and obviously Rice or Tulsa go a different way, and we're possibly talking about the 9 wins, but that's not what happened. And some of that I think we should have seen coming. And
Yeah.
I say that, Brown, because Atos and I saw some shoddy offensive play in a spring practice game last year. We then go to the spring practice game, again, a little bit of shoddy offensive play. And we figured, hey, you know what? It's going to be fixed in the fall, right? Like, it's okay. You know what? They're splitting snaps right now, between Owen and Eddie. The continuity isn't there. It doesn't have to be perfect in the spring. But then you get to the fall, and we didn't really get to see a fall practice game. But I imagine it was about the same because even though we come out in the first quarter of the Kennesaw game and we're like, oh, everything's fixed, everything's terrific, let's go. Owen's gonna break records, right? Forget this. We're gonna be the playoff spot for the G5. Here comes the second and third quarter and fourth quarter where the offense absolutely struggles. And that Kennesaw game ends up being much tighter because of the fact that we just can't move anything on offense. The running game bogs down, just can't get any holes open. We, can't really catch any passes, stuff it just started falling apart. And then we thought, well, it's just a 1 game aberration. First game, it's all right. Then Texas State happens.
Yeah.
And all of us are like, I think UTSA fans are licking their wounds because they're like, what's happening? We're 1-1. We got beat up by our rival. It was all just going downhill, right? So, it's a conundrum of we saw something, but we chose to believe as best we could in our biggest Roadrunner colored glasses that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, I really felt like going into the season, it was just going to be plug and play with Owen. That everything that we saw last season, and yet I should have realized that because that wasn't going to be true because the O-line did struggle last season. And, I thought, well, Frank couldn't really scramble that much. So, going from him to Owen, who is also more of a pocket presence, he'll figure it out just like Frank figured it out. We start the season and they're not giving, Owen designed runs. And so he's struggling to figure out when to run and when to scramble, and it just culminated in that Texas State game.
Yeah, I think for the most part, and I think this is across the board with any fan base, hope springs eternal,
Yeah.
especially in the spring and during the summer and even going into early fall. I will give y'all credit though, because from a week to week basis, uh, I think y'all were pretty much on the mark as far as being able to kind of see exactly what the temp of the team was at that time. So I think y'all should give yourself some credit, at least for the preseason predictions and the overall prediction. Uh, yeah, all of the UTSA fan base, the diehard fans really felt that this was going to be, as you said, kind of a plug and play with Owen, especially from what we saw from last year's bowl game. And it just didn't turn out like that. I didn't see the run game kind of being as inept as it ended up being, and obviously the wide receiver play and stuff like that. I don't think anybody really saw the Texas State massacre kind of
Right.
occurring the way it happened. But
Right.
yeah, but as the season went on, I want to say y'all were probably so kind of in tune with where the team was that there were weeks where I didn't want to listen because I didn't want to be hit with the hard truth of what might happen. So I think y'all did fine in that respect.
It was rough from our point of view too. It was like,
Yeah.
well, I guess this is what we're going to have to say, right? Because this is what's happening right in front of us. So, yeah, certainly, again, I think part of the reason why I said it wasn't a success of a year, there was just a lot of things that fell apart. But let's go real quick and, talk about a couple of, or at least some memorable moments / gaffes this year.
Yeah. I mean, I think from the memorable moments, you have to look at just the development of Owen. That's kind of the number one thing that, it's not a moment, it's kind of moments, but, Traylor said it many times. You're seeing a young quarterback grow up. And, we really did see a very different Owen at the end of the season from the beginning of the season. You could see that he was calm the entire time, but we did get to see a couple of those moments, like we mentioned from ECU, where I think he panicked a little bit and he tried to play hero ball. And, I just think towards the end of the season, he became much more comfortable being the leader, trusting the guys around him. And frankly, I know, Tobes has mentioned it a million times. We ask Owen to do so much that first season. We ask him to win so many games with his arm. And he really did a phenomenal job. I mean, he's in the record books right now that first season, and that's just incredible when you look at where he is in terms of total passing yards compared to, Frank at this point in his career. So, I mean, I think that's just the one positive. And like I said, it's not a moment specifically, but I think it's just the overarching positive thing that we have to look at from the season.
Well, what was cool too, and I just want to jump in real quick, is we didn't really get to see Frank Harris grow up. Like, we got robbed of his like freshman, sophomore, and kind of like junior year. So like the first 3 years, we saw 4 games of him, and that wasn't Owen. Owen literally was a kid, comes in, and he's, like you said, growing up. So that I think is the cool part about it, is that, and that's what I think was memorable about Owen this season, is that you were right. He is growing up right in front of us, and it's something that we didn't get to see before.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll stick with the Owen trend here. We went to the bowl game last year and it had the rough start, and then you see him kind of just keep playing, and he plays through the interceptions and really ends up playing a really great game. This year, you see the mistakes, but one of the things that I really thought was memorable for me, as far as from Owen, he really, I don't want to say it's robotic, because I don't want to make it sound as if it's a negative thing, or I'm trying to say something a diss about him, but he'd really go out there and kind of like Ted Lasso would say, he had the memory of a goldfish. He'd make a mistake, and you never see him get too high or too low, and he just kind of comes back relentlessly, and he keeps attacking. And there might be a bad play, there might be a bad interception, but you never see it weigh on him. He comes back out and he just attacks again. So that's exciting especially when you think about what we might see next season and upcoming seasons. If he still keeps that same kind of mentality, and then you also develop on top of that, he really will be kind of like the Terminator come next
Yeah.
season, where he just goes out there and he's just programmed to destroy.
Yeah, I think the other thing for me, of course, is just, back-to-back bowl wins. The bowls have been kind of that monkey on our back. We've made bowl games, and for years we would go and we'd watch and we'd lose, and it was, disappointing. And then Owen comes in last season, gets the first bowl win, and he gets to kind of tie the season up in a bow and gets the second bowl win, the second consecutive bowl win, and hopefully we'll get to see consecutive wins in the future as well. But I know there weren't really a lot of fans that were able to make it to the bowl game, but being there and getting to see that was, I think, a really special moment again.
Yeah, I agree. I think that getting back-to-back bowl wins, I mean, we're making history again, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a small history book, and we've now been to 5 consecutive bowls, which again, not a small thing either. So, being able to kind of put these and using Traylor's words, kind of stack good games on top of each other at the end of
Yeah,
the year, it's a good thing. It's again growth. All right, you guys ready to look back on the first 5 years of Traylor?
absolutely.
All right. Well, first, let's review a few things that we talked about. It's actually been about 4 years since we recorded and released that episode. We wanted to see what were the next 10 years going to hold. And
Mhm.
so it's been 4 years at least, or 5 years with Trailer. And we had kind of talked about the first year of Trailer. So here's a few things that we had said that we wanted to see over the next 10 years. One thing was, is there going to be a year three fall off? I would say no. I mean,
Yeah.
because you essentially, now you have trended downward, but you're coming off a high that we even then weren't expecting.
Yeah. I mean, I talked about the 3-year fall off with Coker, or the 3-year FBS fall off with Coker, and the 3-year fall off with Wilson. And sure, in terms of wins, yes, there was a fall off, but we also went from Conference USA to the American Conference. So we're not exactly looking at apples to apples. I think one of the things that contributed to that probably we weren't expecting at the time was just how much the level of competition in the American would be more of a step up, where, in Conference USA, I think there was more of a difference between the top programs and the bottom programs. And so UTSA could say they were bigger, faster, stronger than so many of the teams in Conference USA under Trailer. And then we got to the American and that gap closed. And so, and it continues to close each year. So I think, yes, there's been a little bit of a fall off, but not because I can contribute that specifically to Trailer as much as we just increase the level of competition. And once you do that, it's going to take you a little while to transition from Conference USA type players to American level of players. Each time you kind of move up in the conference, you also have to make changes in your roster, and you can't just do that, the next year.
Well, I think we look at year three, and year three for Coker and Wilson was like a drop to like low single digit wins. And for UTSA, honestly, year three was you drop to 11 wins.
Yeah.
And then you get to the AAC and you drop to, oh, wait for it, it's 9 wins, right? So it wasn't like a dramatic drop off. We were
Right.
still very
There's a cliff.
successful.
Yeah.
Right. With Wilson and Coker, it was like we were getting bowl eligible or at least close to there. And then it was like, oh, or back down to like 3 wins and then 4 wins, right? So it was a completely different. So I didn't see the fall off. I didn't feel like I saw a fall off in the play on the field. Whereas previously with our other two coaches, again, you saw the fall off in wins, but you saw the fall off on the field of play too.
Well, yeah, and with Trailer, I mean, we certainly didn't see the fall off in year 3. I mean, like you said, unless you're going to count like going from 12 wins to 11 wins, a fall off, but it really was more like year 4.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So one of the other things I said was like solidify Texas high school recruiting pipeline. I mean, I don't know that it's really a goal anymore with the way that, because we weren't anticipating at that point how NIL and the transfer portal was going to affect
Yeah.
the next 10 years. So I think from what I had said, this one's definitely scratch it off because is no longer relevant to what we were talking about. However, one that was relevant is that I said I want to see Traylor build a consistent winner. I want to see UTSA stop just trying to compete and really start winning some of these games. And it was hilarious because I was like, well, I mean, again, we were thinking Conference USA, right? So I had said something to the effect of, okay, you got to have Rice and UTEP as locked wins, right? Like those got to be automatic wins, and then you got to find a way to beat Southern Miss, La Tech, North Texas, and that very next year, Traylor begins the streak of not losing to any of those teams. Like if you look at Rice and UTEP, and I know that Rice we lost to this year, but you he's not losing. And so now we went from, oh cool, we got bowl eligible again in 2020. We talked about it, celebrated it, and all of a sudden we went to two conference championships, which is nothing that any of us thought was going to happen.
Yeah, not at that point for sure.
No, so I think we got to a point where, to me, he's built the consistent winner that I think we were looking for. Now it's just how do we elevate from there? Just my thoughts. You guys?
Yeah, I agree. Even with the loss to Rice this year, that was one of those games where I just assumed that it was going to be a win. I kind of had it chalked up in my mind
Right.
as a win. Uh, with some of the teams that have carried over from Conference USA, and maybe it's just cockiness on my part, but I really kind of feel we're at the point now where I expect those to be wins. I'm hoping Army will be added to that at some point.
Yeah.
Army just seems to have our number, but he's definitely built a consistent winner. I don't think we've been in the American long enough now to where I can really say which teams I feel will be those consistent wins, but I do have confidence that he'll get us to a point where that's the case, or at least I hope that's going to be what happens.
Well,
But
I think it's
he's done a good job in that respect.
yeah, I was gonna say I think it's fair to say he's built a consistent winner because we all said that 7 wins was not a successful season this year. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the next challenge is going to be the P5s. You know, he does end up beating um, Illinois up in Champaign the very next season after we released that episode, which is great, right? Like it feels like we're on our way again. But I will have to say, like, I want to get past UTSA beating P5s with a losing record, and I guess we could say P4s now. But those bad P4 teams that we play at the beginning of the season, and I'd like to see them kind of do what a Northern Illinois did against Notre Dame earlier this season and knock off a big time program. Like those are the things that UTSA needs to start kind of really building towards and building the program around to say, and it can be done. And the reason it can be done is because of Jeff Traylor. And that's the reason why I believe that, you know, he just keeps, if he keeps pushing it forward and pushing the envelope a little bit, not on us, on the fans, but more on his players and his coaching staff, I think we'll get there.
mhm.
Um, Next couple ones I think kind of go hand in hand, which is increase fan support and solidify the brand and program. And I think, to me, I think he's done both those things, or at least UTSA through the winning, through trailer winning, they've begun to really do that.
Yeah, I mean, we just talked about fan support a little bit earlier, and the fact that San Antonio can be pretty fickle, but still that kind of hardcore group of season ticket holders and kind of hardcore UTSA fans. You know, I think he's done a good job of getting the fan support there. I'm not sure without really UTSA just being a consistent 12-win season how you can do too much more, you know, because like you said, he had to beg the city to come basically when we had, you know, won 11 games straight or 10 games straight or whatever it was. But I think the thing that he's done a really great job with is the student support. even this year in the down season, granted we were winning at home when the students were coming to the games, but this year, you saw the student section pretty much full for most of the games, with the exception of maybe the last Friday night game. And we wouldn't have seen that under Wilson at all. So just the fact that he's been so successful at really kind of engaging the students, I think, has just exceeded my expectations.
Yeah, and I'll address that from another aspect. Uh, some of the travels that I've had over the last couple of years, where I've gone to, actually went to go see an Alabama game once, and traveling on the West Coast. If I have any type of UTSA gear or engage with anybody, and I mention UTSA, it's no longer a matter of, I remember years ago where they would say, "Oh, is that an FCS team?" or something to that effect, and now they have recognition of them. They know the road runners, and it's usually always complimentary, where they're saying like, "Yeah, they're a pretty good team," or "Hey, I watched the game on ESPN last night." So that's all really attributed to Traylor and the product that he's kind of put together and the culture that he's kind of built, to where now, if we are on ESPN, there's probably going to be eyeballs across the nation on that game, just because they've like, yeah, this is a winning program, or at the very least, it's going to be an exciting game, not just a dead game that I'm going to flip away from. So
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of really building our brand, he's done a great job. He's done a great job building the culture, building the brand, getting our name, out there, sometimes in good ways, sometimes in maybe not so good ways. We're talking about punters and kickers drinking and whatever else he said over the years. But, I do think that just the fact that we hear ourselves mentioned occasionally on game day, or from Scott Van Pelt, or from these other national broadcasters, is just, you know, it's just great. And it's what we were all hoping for when the program, kicked off all those years ago.
I think the big one that you guys mentioned was the fact that Trailers kind of built that relationship with the students, at least with the current students, because they're the future, right? Like they're going to be alumni, they're going to be the future donors, they're going to be the ones that are going to be tied into UTSA, and you know him doing so is going to be really big for UTSA in the future. So you know he could have been successful and not really been a guy that goes out there and passes out pizza slices on Wednesday,
Yeah.
but he did it and he didn't flinch. He didn't see it as something that was below him, and I think that in itself is something that also makes him so relatable at times to a lot of people. And that's why, again, as much as we will criticize him at times, we also have to love that about him, is that
Yeah. There is
he's very
that
good at
high
that.
school coach part of him right there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, the last one was future coaches are going to have to build on success of their predecessors. That hasn't been a big thing because Traylor never left. He's
Yeah.
still here. So, all right, here's some little categories that we came up with, which would be, I think, kind of fun to have some discussions with here. So, first question I have for the two of you: what's your we're just looking at the Traylor era here.
Mhm.
So the last 5 years, what was your most rewatchable game?
well, for me, so it's actually the same team, but two different years. The It's against Memphis. The first was 2021, the 31-28 win over Memphis. I should have gone back and actually watched the game, but I remember having the game on. I remember at a certain point we were down, and I kind of walked away, not in disappointment of the game, just kind of lost a little bit of focus on it. Then it's like I turned around, and all of a sudden we're ready to win the game. But I think the game that's actually going to really solidify for me is the 2024 win, the 44-36 win. We were at that game. It was the blackout game. It was an early morning game. I expected the game to be a blackout game for many other reasons than the color of the uniforms. And we had the black uniforms on, and we really should have been dead to rights as far as getting a loss that game, kind of having bowl eligibility kind of get out of our grasp. and somehow the team pulled it together and played a great game that game. So that's probably the most rewatchable, most memorable game for me.
Well, I'll have to be honest because I have rewatched this game many, many times, and I think Ben has gotten annoyed because maybe not the entire game, but certainly like the last couple of minutes of this game. But for me, it's the UNT game in October. So not the championship game
2022.
2022,
Yeah.
but the October 2022 game. That whole sequence where, they've gone down and they've scored, they've taken the lead. It's a fourth quarter, and then Frank kind of mounts this comeback. And, it starts with Zakari in the reach to get, the 4th and 1. And they don't, the North Texas sideline doesn't think that he's got it. And you can see the defensive coordinator, that
Phil Bennett.
Phil Bennett in his little yellow shorts on the sideline, kind of dancing or whatever, or yellow shirt or whatever it was. But, they're just so sure that they have won this game. And then they come back and they measure and they say, nope, we got it. And from there, then you have, the Oscar catch. And part of the thing that just makes it so great for me is the announcer. I just love his, like, the whole sequence. He's like, oh, what a catch, Oscar Cardenas. He's like, he's so excited. And it's just like, I can just watch that over and over again. And then they immediately go from that to JT Clark, the touchdown. And then it's sealed with the kick return that's fumbled by North Texas, and we recover it. And I don't know, I can't remember which player it was on special teams, but you see him kind of dancing, and you see Frank at the end doing the little Flappy Bird, and it just, that whole ending of the game, like, there are a couple of clips on YouTube, and I swear I've watched it probably like 30 times. So,
She has.
yeah, I love it.
Well, one of the things I like about that game was the fact that at one point, I think it was Frank that kind of remembers or starts like talking about like some of the things that were going on. And that last play to JT, he's like, "Oh yeah, Josh Cephas lined up on the wrong side."
Oh,
And
yeah.
and so there was like dysfunction. Like there was dysfunction on the field, and then Bob Davie, is the other guy that was he was the color commentator on that, and he's like, "Oh, they're gonna go ahead and like clock it here, or they're gonna, and they're just gonna like burn this down." And then he's like, "Oh no, they're gonna go for it. They're
Yep.
going for it." And so to have Bob like pretty much kind of illustrating the sort of hysteria that's going on because the dome is going crazy after Oscar makes that catch, and then the fact that Josh is on the wrong side, all this stuff could have gone wrong, and then you make that throw to JT. It's great. But earlier that season, we had, to me, my most rewatchable game was 2022 Houston, because that was like it was us, like the underdog. We were like rocking, we were just wailing away. And then all of a sudden, like the supposed heavyweight in Houston, comes back and starts pummeling us. But it took like the same thing. And it set up that North Texas game because Frank, I don't think they had timeouts. And at least I'm not remembering right now. But anyway, he mounts that comeback, and there was another big catch by Oscar to get to the game tying field goal to send it into overtime. And it goes 3 overtimes. We end up losing. But the reason to me it's such a most rewatchable game is because there were so many good moments and so many good performances from everybody, whether it was Houston, whether it was, UTSA. It was just, again, like a Rocky fight, right? It was just everybody kind of throwing their best punches and they're going at it. And then, of course, you have Dana Holgerson, who had set up that whole game by saying, "Oh, they pump in noise."
Oh, yeah.
And so, there was all these memes from UTSA kind of leading up to it, pump this or something like that, like it was, there was some pettiness there too. And there was a lot of good interactions that, it's a series that, obviously the next year is not as memorable, but to me, I thought that was the kind of a start of a special season in 2022.
I really thought you were going to say the UAB game in 2021.
Well, there was some moments, but we'll see if it comes up, because I'm going to ask you this one, and it just depends on how you want to see it. But what was the best heat check moment in the last 5 years?
So I'm not sure exactly what y'all's responses are. the obvious is going to be the two conference championship runs, and that was actually my initial answer. But I don't know why this is standing out so much to me. But again, starting with Memphis, the blackout uniforms, that's really something about those uniforms need to be talked about more, because that run of the black uniforms, I think, is pretty special. That run is basically what gets us to a bowl game this past year. So to me, that was a heat check. They need to frame those uniforms. They need to put them up in the rafters, or maybe not the rafters, but just put them in a trophy case or something. But those uniforms are special. So that's my heat check moment.
Well, they did raffle them off, and I understand that there might be some more for sale. So, you can get yourself one.
I'll
Hey,
look into it.
for me, my best heat check moment, I had to go back. I went back into the archive, so to speak. I went to Lowell Narcisse versus BYU. He comes in for Frank at after halftime, goes 17 for 20 in the second half, 229 yards, 2 touchdowns, 9 rushes for 26 yards. The guy came in and just gave it everything and almost willed UTSA to a victory, or at least, a chance at, knocking off a top G5 team. And that to me was a moment. And there's been so many moments. I was trying to like knock down, even going back to the Memphis game back in 2021. Sincere McCormick was amazing during that game. 42 rushes for 184 yards, 3 touchdowns. And the guy was just phenomenal during his runs. But Lowell at halftime, I mean, I say those numbers, and it was just one half of ball from Lowell, and he ends up taking the starting nod the next week because of his performance at BYU. I mean, it's just what a heat check, man. I think it would have been a legendary game in UTSA history had he been able to lead us to the win.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say, kind of this is sort of a trailer moment, but in that first UT game, when Traylor has that sequence of coming out with the surprise onside kick that we recover, and then there was a double pass, later on in that sequence, like that was just peak Traylor. Unfortunately, again, UT, the gap was just a little too much for us to overcome that year, but you know, those were moments where, sitting at, the stadium in UT, surrounded by 100,000 UT fans, it gave UTSA that kind of excitement in that moment of like, maybe we can get to the level where we can compete, against good P4 programs.
I mean, he was feeling himself to have
Oh, yeah,
called that onside.
absolutely.
But again, go back to what he talked about after the game, and he says, "Oh, we had seen what they were doing." So he was going to call the onside at some point during that game. He just needed to find that right moment. But we'll go to unanswerable questions, because I think that gets a little interesting, because there's a couple of moments, and that I think that if we go back and look at it, we don't know what happens, but we can kind of talk a little bit about what might happen. First one being, what if Traylor takes a tech job during the middle of the 2021 season? First of all, how does, you kind of spawn off, how does Traylor's legacy then come about at UTSA, because he didn't finish off a season, right? We're undefeated, and he decides to leave for tech. Do we get Barry Lunny as our coach, and does he remain the coach after he's the interim? Do we keep Will Stein for a little bit longer with Frank? Do we get an extra year of Will? There's so many things there that could have happened.
Yeah, and I think when I stop and focus on what would have happened if Traylor left, I think it really will depend on what happens after that. If we get Barry Lunny and they finish out the 2021 season and they still compete and win Conference USA, and Barry Lunny or whoever takes over continues a higher level of success, I think we look at Traylor one way. But if Traylor leaves, we fall off the rest of that 2021 season. We never get to the Conference USA championship, and whoever follows him can't replicate the success. Then I think we're in a very different place. Like, I go back and I think about my Iowa State days and my feelings about Gene Chizik and how he left Iowa State after I think it was 2 seasons, you know, and I was,
Bad seasons.
yes. And again, things hadn't turned out well while he was there, but he leaves when you're starting to feel like, okay, he's recruiting, he's getting some good guys in, things can kind of turn. And then it felt like he quit on Iowa State, and I, for the longest time, felt really badly about Gene Chizik whenever anyone would say his name. I was like, Gene Chizik, until I read an article many moons later where he kind of reflected on how he left and, seemed to have some regrets. And so now he's okay. But I think, again, like, it really just depends on what would have happened, where, like, if the season went badly, if we were sitting here and we were still at a point kind of we were in the Frank Wilson era, then I think everybody would have turned on Traylor and we'd be talking about Traylor like, the guy who screwed us over. But if Traylor had, left and things were okay, then, maybe we continue to look at him somewhat fondly. Although I still think that had he left that season, he would certainly not be the beloved coach that he is today.
Yeah, so my what if will probably result in some boos from the UTSA fan base. So I will
Excellent.
start. I will start by saying that I love Traylor. I'm glad that he's here. I don't want him to leave, but I've always had this what if of what if Wilson had one more season. And the only reason I say that is just with the maturity of the team at the time, with Frank Harris kind of starting to develop and kind of come into his own. What would one more season have looked? Now I'm glad we didn't get to see that, because I think what Traylor has done with the team has been absolutely fantastic. But also kind of deep diving into that thought a little bit more is, what if we were in the state of the transfer portal the way that we are now, and when Wilson left, if we'd seen this mass exodus of players, and Traylor comes in and he really doesn't have that kind of full cupboard of players that he kind of got to start his tenure with.
Mm-hmm.
How that would have looked, if he had to take a little bit more time to get some of his players in. Again, I'm glad that this is just a what if question. We didn't actually have to, we're not talking about the reality of that,
Yeah.
but there is part of me that's just curious, what if that would have come to be.
Yeah, I think the Wilson question would be much more interesting if 2020 wasn't the year after he left, because I really feel like he would have struggled during the COVID season to keep the team together and build on the cohesion, because, listening to some of the interviews after Traylor started, things started coming out about kind of the locker room and how Wilson had handled the locker room. And so I'm not sure that he would have been able to maybe even field a team, for as many games during 2020, just because whether people were sick or just quit on him, But if it was a normal season, that might be a more interesting question. If it had been like 2021 was the season right after he left, instead of it being that COVID year and just all the craziness that kind of happened then.
Yeah, I think, look, if he gets that extra year, I don't think that we get the conference titles the next 2 seasons. And I think is what was built for those two conference titles was what we got was built in 2020 from Traylor. And that was how he was able to get the cohesion with the team during a time when there was so much uncertainty with COVID and everything that happened. And so what he was able to build was terrific. I just don't know that we get that. Or, I mean, and here's the other part to it. I don't know that we get Traylor.
Yeah.
In 2021. It could be a totally different person.
Well, yeah, because
So,
he would have gone to Lamar or somewhere else,
Lamar,
and who
yeah.
knows if he would have looked at us at 2021.
Yeah.
But I do think the question about what would have happened if we had the transfer portal at that point would be really interesting, because there are probably a lot of guys that stayed and that were in pivotal positions in 2020 who would have left. They still had the opportunity to leave in 2020, but I think they would have to sit out a season. And so that, seemed like it kept them there. And even Frank has talked about, his thoughts about you know, should I stay with this coach? I don't know who he is. And, kind of the conversations that he had with his parents and Sincere and Rashad at the time that convinced him to stay. But, if it was this transfer portal with, no restrictions and you can leave, we probably would have been a very different year for Traylor.
All right, here's another unanswerable one for you. What if Bill Clark goes for it on 4th down in that UAB game in 2021 and makes it?
Ooh,
We don't get the conference. We don't even play for the conference title
right.
against Western Kentucky. So, and again, do we see Traylor in the same way that we that we see him now, right? Like,
Hmm.
what changes happen after that season, if any? I mean, I don't know that anything necessarily happens, but certainly I think you kind of start like thinking about what a loss to UAB does. Like,
Hmm.
is Traylor still going to gamble on some things? Do we see any of the other players kind of legacy kind of change? I mean, those are, I think, just things again that spawn off just that one unanswerable, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think 2022 we probably still would have won because those guys would have been really hungry for that championship. It was one thing to win a second championship, but I think they would have been really in the hunt for the first.
I guess my question is, how often is this brought up on UAB podcasts?
Oh my
I
gosh.
just imagine that there's a lot of drinking, a lot of emotions.
It's just
Especially
So,
now with
yes,
all of the stuff happening with
oh
Dilfer. Oh
God.
my gosh, yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, no, that is a great point because I think this is a great unanswerable for UAB. I mean, if you had somebody from UAB here, we could have, I think, an entire podcast on just
Probably.
that one unanswerable question, right? Like
It's not
that.
even a podcast at that point, it's just therapy.
Yeah. You're just taking like UAB callers and they're just coming on and just like riffing right away. All right. Here's a big question that I have for you guys. And, it's one that I had been kind of mulling over. And then when I sent it to you guys, I know that the Brown was really like intrigued by it, but has Traylor hit his apex at UTSA?
I'll let you answer that one first, Brown.
So that was a great question. And I had a lot of conversations with Christy about this. Again, I think she humors a lot of my conversations. I think she just kind of nods and lets me kind of mull through all these things. But I kind of brought up this thought of, is Trailer's apex the same as UTSA's apex? Essentially, does Trailer go as far as UTSA can go based on, money, resources, facilities, all of that. So I don't know if I have an answer on it. I think I just have more thoughts, if anything. But I feel that Trailer's done really, really well with everything that he has. Um, I, I I just question, if we've hit that ceiling, especially that we don't see um, necessarily like, these huge practice facilities or, the covered practice facility that we're still waiting for. We haven't seen those things yet. Is he kind of limited until those things kind of come into play? And we're just kind of working off of what we've been able to get with the players that we get and the resources that he just has available to him at this point.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I hope this is not his apex mountain, but it might be. I guess you could probably say, 2022 might have been his apex, but I hope not. My concern at times with Trailer, yes, he is, like you mentioned, there are limits in terms of, the financial dollars that we have for building and revenue share and NIL and yada, yada, yada. But I think the thing that concerns me the most with Traylor is he going to settle for good or is he going to push for great? Because we've achieved 2 conference championships in the past. But to get there again in the American, yes, he is going to need, money and facilities and all of those other things. But I just wonder if he'll, we've kind of questioned his loyalty. And I wonder if he will let some of that get in his way instead of trying to, ask himself, okay, well, this was good. We had a winning season, but a winning season isn't good enough. I want to look at what we could have done to get to 10 wins this season. And if I ask that question, then do I need to make some additional changes? Do I need to find the next Will Stein? I don't know that he's going to look at it that way. I think he's going to settle for, well, this is what I have. So this is, good enough. And I think at times he's going to say, well, this is all I can do because I don't have the money, the resources, whatever. But when I hear those situations come up and those excuses come up, my first question is, well, who are you comparing us to? Is it the facilities? Is it the money? Is it the revenue share within our conference? Or are you comparing us to a P4? Because we'll never get to a P4. I just think he's going to have to make some difficult decisions in order to push for that. And I'm not sure that he's comfortable with that because loyalty is such a big part of his personality.
I think that's a great segue to my answer, which is yes, he has hit his apex. And the reason I say that is because there was a special collection of players that were there for him when he first came in. There's a wide receiver trio that we've never seen at UTSA and haven't seen since then, since they've all left. One who's still around, but it's injuries.
Mm-hmm.
A quarterback that took full advantage of a terrific running back, and then those 3 special wide receivers, right? A quarterback that was so engaging that he really kind of has grasped San Antonio. So it's San Antonio just loves themselves some Frank Harris, and
Right.
I think it was just a special time, and I struggle to see because of everything that you guys have laid out in terms of why or what he will need to continue to push this forward. And I go back, Toves, to what we've talked about, which is that push of from good to great. And I think that he just, the loyalty is what is going to hold him back. And we all have our kryptonite. We
Yeah.
all do, right? There's something that we have a kryptonite to. And I think to me, that's the reason why Traylor is going to struggle to at least get up to that next apex, if there is one.
Well, I'm thinking about it. So a lot of that success in what we would say is this apex was with players that weren't his players. They were players that he inherited. Do you think he has a level of pride to where he wants to be able to match that success, but really with his own guys on his own terms? And if that is possibly a driving factor to maybe where we have not seen his apex yet, to where, or at the very least, we get a kind of a twin apex of him having this level of success with the players from the previous coach, and then saying like, okay, I have now matched that. But not only have I matched that, but I've matched that in a tougher conference, and these are my kids through and through, and I did it. I don't know if he necessarily has that level of pride to where he really wants to kind of do that, but that'll be interesting to see if maybe that is a motivating factor moving forward.
It really is the push of good to great. I mean, I think, and it's not just the players, right? I think it's also coaches. I think we've seen some of the talented guys leave, and I think with that went some creativity, some ability, I think, to push back on Traylor and say this is why we need to do it this way.
Hmm.
And I think that, and that's why I was, really kind of thought about this quite a bit too, on whether it's been his apex, and it feels like such an easy answer the way I said it, but it's really not. I mean, there are, to your point, Rob, some. I think he's going to want to do it with his guys, and I think he's going to want to find it, and I think he sees that he's got Owen. But my question then is, next year he's talked about the fact that we are replacing most of our defense,
Hmm.
right? So that means he's got to reload. That means that you're now potentially, if you can't get that defense to play as well as it could next season, you're looking at Owen's senior season at trying to capitalize on having your quarterback. Now you have to already start trying to find your next Owen, your next Frank, right? So it's it's tough. I think the other part to it, and we can't minimize it too, is he had that special collection of players. That's one thing, right? He had those guys, but he also benefited from the COVID seasons. Yeah, that's something that was big. I mean, they had
Yeah.
extra seasons to utilize, so he could lead, kind of keep some of his veteran guys in place, and so it really brought this team and it kept it at a mature level, as a mature level in terms of eligibility wise.
Hmm.
But he never had to reload and have to essentially have like, and I'm going to make this as a as a far reaching thing, but like 10 or 11 freshmen
Right.
and sophomores on offense or defense, right? Where like you knew that their youth was just, this, you can't have unrealistic expectations. So that's where I was kind of going with it, is I think it's going to be much more difficult than what he was able to inherit when he first came on. All right, guys. So let's end it with this. In the famous words of President Bartlet on the West Wing, what's next?
You know, next season, I think, is going to be a really challenging season for us because of what you just mentioned with our defense. I mean, when you go back, we have one single digit left on defense, and that's Owen Pee Wee. So it's going to be a really tough year. And I think having gone through this season, my predictions will probably be more realistic than they were this year. But I think it's going to tell us whether or not Traylor will be able to compete in the American Conference for that conference championship. I wouldn't expect it next season, but Owen's senior season, this is, to me, it's like this is the setup for Owen's senior season. And next season's going to be really telling in terms of, are we doing the things that are going to move us forward or not?
So for me, looking outside the UTSA walls, you've got the House settlement coming up,
Hmm.
which you have so much uncertainty as to, how are universities, or what are universities going to do in terms of paying, and then really it's the athletic departments paying their players, right? So what compensation packages are coming? Something that Traylor is going to have to deal with, and it's going to be, I think, up until we figure that out, I think we're going to finally figure out like what those expectations I think are going to be for UTSA, because of everything you've laid out. Like, how do we retain some of these players? How do
Hmm.
we attract new players now with the compensation package of saying, here, you're going to get X amount of dollars from this, and this if you come to UTSA?
Yeah. And are we going to be able to be competitive within the American Conference, or at least the top echelon of the American Conference?
And I mean, I would imagine so, because Memphis still has Brian Silverfield, and I have told you before that Ryan Silverfield is not the coach you think he is. So we've got a shot. Like I
I
think,
meant, are we going to be competitive in terms of the money for revenue share?
and I'm just pointing out Ryan Silverfield. That's all. But I'm just saying, like, I think you. But when you're looking at the other schools too, you're kind of seeing the fact that they're gonna have to come up with compensation packages. Of course, some of them are gonna have old money for them. They're
Hmm.
gonna have some of those benefits. We're not gonna have some benefits coming in from the health science center. Um, how does that kind of help the athletics department? Don't know, but I think that those things that are looming are going to be interesting just in the next year, just to figure out, because I think it sets up the rest of the next 5 years of Trailer. Like,
Hmm.
and I think he's the type of guy that's going to be able to look a kid in in the eyes and say, here's what we can give you. I'm gonna love you, and then we're gonna coach you hard, and then we're gonna like put you out there, and you're gonna perform. And I think if there's one guy that can do it, it's Traylor. But I think he can do it here well at a G5 level.
All right, I'm probably gonna have to apologize in advance because I'm about to get a little dark. But so I thought about it at first, and everything that y'all are saying is on a very intelligent, granular level. I kind of took it initially at a high point, but then somehow I ended up in a dark place. But uh, the hope is that what we see next is becoming a perennial contender within the American Conference. But if that does happen, and maybe we see a conference championship at some point down the road, or we have this kind of sustained success, the next thing is when Traylor leaves. So
Mhm.
what happens when that
Right.
happens? So really the hope is, we kind of touched on some of the points that he's created this brand recognition, that he's left the program in a state where somebody out there is looking at UTSA as being the job that's going to get him where he needs to go, or
Mhm.
just being a place where this next coach can really grow and kind of take the program to these next heights. But um, kind of thinking back, last couple of seasons, especially the seasons in Conference USA, at the end of the season, it always felt like we were hitting this, will Traylor stay or won't he stay? And now we're kind of in this place where, because of this past season, that we don't have those worries. So maybe part of me is that, I'm just naturally expecting to have some sort of, is Traylor going to leave? So that kind of bled into my answer here. But um, what will the next coach look like? What hopefully Traylor has kind of put us to a point where whoever that next coach is, even if there's maybe a minor step back, it's going to continue to push UTSA forward. But yeah, I got a little dark there. Yeah, y'all,
But
y'all had much better responses than me.
I
Um,
know a lot of people worry about what happened. What if Traylor took this job, or what if he took that? I hope that he leaves for a bigger job. I hope that the Traylor era doesn't end with him getting fired. I mean, if it ends with him retiring and we're playing well, okay, that's great too. But, he is kind of young. So I would expect that, either he's going to be here for another few more years or maybe one more contract. But I hope that he goes on to something bigger and better, because I want UTSA to be seen as a program where people, like you said, they want to come, they want to take it to the next step, they see it as a good job. And, maybe that means a good job for now until we can move to the next level. But, I think the worst thing that could happen is for us to see the Traylor era end in him getting fired for some reason.
Yeah, and to go back to something you said 4 years ago, Rob, it's always going to be a job. I think that at some point, as long as it's a stepping stone, it's a good thing. Um, you know, if it's never seen as a stepping stone, if it's never seen as something that you can have success at, as you both have pointed out, then Traylor and Dr. Campos didn't do their job, right? Like they weren't able to show that what you can accomplish at UTSA. And
Mm-hmm.
I think Traylor has absolutely done that. Again, have nitpicked him. I think, have gone back and criticized him for certain things, but the reality is he is the most successful coach in UTSA history, and he's, continues to find ways to kind of get through seasons with, guys that are falling down, like essentially on crutches out there. But,
He duct tapes him up and throws him
yeah,
out
I
there, and
mean,
it all
there
works
can
out.
be a long conversations about all of that, but the reality is, we've gotten to a place, I think, where, I think it's been looking back at these 5 years of Traylor, is it's been much more successful than the three of us thought when we first put together an episode 4 years ago.
Well, I think that about wraps it up for us on the Hail Married podcast. Thank you again, Big Brown, for being part of this special episode. It was great to have you here and be able to reminisce on everything that's happened during the Traylor era.
Thank you guys for having me. Congratulations on the 100th episode. Continued success with the podcast. It's been wonderful listening to y'all over the last 100 episodes or 99 episodes, I guess, leading up to this. But look forward to the next 100.
Appreciate it.
Yep. I'm Atobes.
And I'm Toves.
We'll be back soon to recap UTSA basketball.
Birds up.